Ivan, a young man from London, was always fond of adventures. He was an avid traveler and frequently used the Airbnb platform to rent unique homes and apartments in different corners of the world. His next adventure awaited him in a secluded village somewhere on the outskirts of Yorkshire. When Ivan stumbled upon an unusual cottage offered by a host named Mank, he was instantly captivated by the mystical photographs and reviews left by previous guests. Everyone described their experiences as if they had visited a fairy tale world. Although some mentioned strange occurrences, Ivan decided it would only add intrigue to his adventure. He got in touch with Mank and arranged to stay at the house for the weekend. When the long-awaited vacation time arrived, Ivan packed his belongings and set off on a bus to the enigmatic village. Even on the approach to his destination, he noticed that the house was surrounded by dense woods, and the path to it seemed quite challenging. As he disembarked from the bus, Mank was already waiting for him in the square. Trembling with fear of the unknown, Ivan's hands shook. The old man with a hunched back and impenetrable gaze stood out from the usual hosts he had encountered before. However, Mank smiled and nodded warmly, welcoming the young man inside. Inside the house, an air of mystery lingered. Despite its cleanliness and coziness, the air seemed imbued with something enigmatic. Ivan decided to take a walk around the area, but Mank stopped him. It's better not to venture outside after sunset. There is a lot of wild nature here, which becomes especially dangerous at night. Ivan nodded and decided to take a stroll later. He asked Mank some questions about the house, but the host skillfully evaded the answers, as if every corner of this strange house held secrets from the past. Later in the evening, as the sun began to set, Ivan heard peculiar sounds coming from the woods. The wind whistled through the trees, and echoes of the past seemed to reach out to him from the darkness. As darkness descended, the local noises appeared even more eerie. He resolved to spend the rest of the time inside the house. In his room, he found an ancient book with mysterious symbols on the cover. Ivan started reading the tale left by a previous guest about the house. It spoke of Mank being extraordinary and possessing an inexplicable power. Fear began to creep up on Ivan, and he considered putting the book aside, but his curiosity pushed him to read on. The subsequent pages described a ritual that took place in Mank's house during the full moon. Guests who had been here during that time claimed they were transported to other worlds and saw things beyond rational comprehension. Initially, Ivan dismissed it as mere fiction, but his own sensations began to suggest otherwise. It was as if the house truly held supernatural power. As the night progressed, Ivan couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that settled deep within him. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls, making him question his decision to stay in this mysterious abode. Nevertheless, an insatiable curiosity drove him forward. Unable to resist the temptation, Ivan decided to explore more about the full moon ritual mentioned in the book. He spent hours poring over the pages, learning about the significance of certain symbols and the chants used during the ceremony. Despite the chilling tales, he couldn't help but be drawn to the prospect of experiencing something extraordinary. The clock struck midnight, and the full moon bathed the room in an ethereal glow. Against his better judgment, Ivan felt compelled to partake in the ritual. He followed the instructions from the book, drawing intricate symbols on the floor and reciting the ancient chants. The air seemed to thicken with every word, and a sense of anticipation filled the room. Suddenly, the candles flickered erratically, and the temperature dropped dramatically. Ivan's heart pounded in his chest, and a shiver ran down his spine. He questioned whether he had made a grave mistake by delving into forces he couldn't comprehend. But it was too late to turn back. As he continued the ritual, the room filled with an otherworldly energy. Visions flashed before his eyes, fleeting glimpses of landscapes he had never seen before. The barrier between reality and the unknown seemed to blur, and he felt a strange presence enveloping him. Just as Ivan was about to reach the pinnacle of the ritual, a deafening crash echoed through the house. Startled, he stopped the incantation and looked around in a panic. Had he awakened something that should have remained dormant? The door to his room creaked open slowly, revealing a chilling sight. Standing in the doorway was a spectral figure, shrouded in an ethereal glow. The figure appeared human, but its features were obscured, leaving only an ominous silhouette. Fear consumed Ivan, and he struggled to find his voice. "Who are you?" he managed to whisper, his heart pounding in his ears. The apparition spoke with a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of time. "I am the spirit of the house, bound to these walls for eternity. You have awakened me with your meddling." Ivan's mind raced, and he tried to comprehend the situation. Was he in danger? What had he done? I didn't mean to disturb you," Ivan stammered. "I was only curious about the house and its mysteries." The spirit remained silent for a moment, and then spoke again, its tone less ominous. "Curiosity can lead to both wondrous discoveries and terrible consequences. You must be cautious with the knowledge you seek." As the initial fear subsided, Ivan felt a strange connection to the spirit. It seemed to share in the curiosity that had brought him here in the first place. "I didn't mean any harm," Ivan insisted. "I was just trying to understand this place better." The spirit regarded him for a moment before fading away, leaving Ivan alone in the moonlit room. The candles returned to their gentle glow, and the temperature returned to normal. The young traveler sat there, reflecting on what had just transpired. The encounter had been both terrifying and enlightening. He realized that some mysteries were not meant to be unraveled, and that certain forces were best left undisturbed. The next morning, Ivan bid farewell to Mank, thanking him for the unusual experience. As he left the enigmatic house behind, he couldn't help but feel changed by the encounter with the spirit. From that day forward, Ivan continued his adventures, but with newfound respect for the unknown. The memory of the house and its secrets would stay with him forever, a reminder that sometimes the most intriguing journeys are the ones that test the boundaries of curiosity and the human spirit. Nancy had always been fascinated by the idea of exploring new places and meeting different people. She loved to travel and was constantly on the lookout for unique experiences. One day, while browsing the internet, she stumbled upon an enticing Airbnb listing. It was a picturesque cottage nestled deep within a dense forest, surrounded by a serene lake. The pictures were mesmerizing, and the reviews seemed overwhelmingly positive. Without a second thought, Nancy booked the cottage for a weekend getaway. As the weekend approached, Nancy's excitement grew. She packed her bags and set off for the remote location. The drive was long and winding, but the thought of the tranquil escape motivated her. Eventually, Nancy reached the edge of the forest and followed a narrow path that led to the hidden cottage. As she stepped out of her car and gazed at the idyllic surroundings, a chill ran down her spine. Something about the place seemed eerie, but she brushed it off as mere nerves. The cottage's owner, Mr. Robertson, greeted Nancy warmly. He was a tall, elderly man with a welcoming smile. However, there was a certain intensity in his eyes that made Nancy uncomfortable. As she settled into the cottage, she noticed odd trinkets and symbols scattered around the living room. Mr. Robertson explained that they were artifacts from the forest, but Nancy couldn't shake the feeling that they held a deeper, darker meaning. As night fell, the forest came alive with strange sounds. Nancy tried to shake off her unease by telling herself it was just the usual sounds of nature. However, a sense of foreboding lingered. When she finally went to bed, she found it difficult to sleep. Every creak and rustle outside seemed to magnify, and she could have sworn she heard faint whispers. The next day, Nancy decided to explore the forest, hoping that the daylight would dispel her fears. She hiked through the dense trees, following an overgrown trail that Mr. Robertson had mentioned. The deeper she ventured, the more she felt an inexplicable pull, as though an unseen force was guiding her. As the day wore on, Nancy realized she had lost her way. Panic set in, and she quickened her pace, trying to find her way back to the cottage. But the forest seemed to shift around her, changing the familiar landmarks into unrecognizable shapes. She was hopelessly lost. Just as the sun began to set, Nancy stumbled upon a clearing in the forest. To her horror, she found herself standing in front of a decrepit cabin, far older than the cottage she had rented. The door was slightly ajar, and a cold breeze emanated from within. Curiosity mingled with dread. Nancy couldn't resist the urge to peek inside. The interior of the cabin was filled with ancient writings and bizarre symbols etched into the walls. Fear gripped Nancy as she realized that this was no ordinary place. Before she could leave, she noticed a peculiar journal lying on a dusty table. Intrigued, she opened it and began to read. The journal belonged to a previous guest named Samuel, who had stayed in the cottage years ago. As Nancy read his words, she learned of a horrifying secret. Samuel had also become lost in the forest and stumbled upon the same cabin. The symbols and trinkets were part of an ancient ritual that Mr. Robertson performed to trap unwitting guests in a time loop. The forest was cursed, and those who entered were doomed to relive the same day over and over again. Terrified, Nancy realized that she had fallen into the same trap. She had to find a way to break the curse, but she knew she couldn't do it alone. Her mind raced as she thought of a way to escape this nightmare. She needed help, but who could she trust? Nancy's heart pounded in her chest as she clutched the journal tightly. She had to find a way out of the cursed forest, but she knew she couldn't do it alone. With trembling hands, she closed the journal and decided to confide in Mr. Robertson, hoping that he might know a way to break the curse. She returned to the cottage, trying to appear as composed as possible, but her unease was evident. Nancy found Mr. Robertson preparing dinner in the kitchen. Summoning all her courage, she asked him about the strange symbols and the cabin she had stumbled upon. Mr. Robertson's expression darkened, and he sighed heavily. Reluctantly, he revealed the truth about the forest's curse and the time loop that ensnared those who dared to wander too far. He admitted to being the guardian of the cursed place, tasked with ensuring that the loop continued indefinitely. Torn between fear and desperation, Nancy pleaded with Mr. Robertson to help her escape the cursed forest. She implored him to break the cycle and release her from the torment of reliving the same day over and over again. For the first time, she saw a glimmer of remorse in his eyes. Mr. Robertson hesitated but finally agreed to help. He explained that the only way to break the curse was to find a hidden artifact, a small stone pendant hidden deep within the forest. The pendant held the power to reverse the loop, but it was heavily guarded by malevolent spirits. Realizing the dangers ahead, Nancy steeled herself for the treacherous journey. She and Mr. Robertson set out at dawn, following an ancient map that showed the pendant's location. The forest seemed even more ominous in the early morning light, and every step they took felt like a step into the unknown. As they ventured deeper, they encountered eerie apparitions and heard anguished whispers that echoed through the trees. The malevolent spirits that guarded the pendant were making their presence known. Nancy's heart pounded with every rustle, and she had to remind herself that she had to keep moving. The forest seemed to conspire against them, trying to lead them astray. Yet Nancy and Mr. Robertson pressed on, driven by their determination to break the curse. Time seemed to stretch infinitely, but they couldn't give up. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached the sacred clearing where the pendant was said to be hidden. The atmosphere grew even more oppressive, and Nancy could sense the eyes of the malevolent spirits watching them. As Nancy reached for the pendant, the spirits unleashed their wrath. Shadows danced around them, and a bone-chilling cold filled the air. But Nancy clutched the pendant tightly, refusing to let go. She closed her eyes and focused all her willpower, channeling her courage to break the curse. A blinding light enveloped Nancy and Mr. Robertson, and they felt a powerful surge of energy coursing through them. The pendant's magic was working. The forest began to tremble, and time itself seemed to shift. The curse was breaking. When Nancy opened her eyes, she found herself back in the cottage, but everything felt different. The symbols were gone, and the trinkets no longer exuded an ominous aura. The forest outside the window seemed calmer, and the sounds were no longer haunting. Nancy knew that the curse had been broken, and she was finally free. She thanked Mr. Robertson for his help, though she could see the sadness in his eyes as he bid her farewell. Leaving the cottage behind, Nancy drove away from the cursed forest. The sense of relief and liberation washed over her, but she couldn't forget the ordeal she had endured. The memories of the terrifying time loop would stay with her forever. Back in her normal life, Nancy vowed never to forget the lessons she learned. She had a newfound respect for the unknown and an understanding that some places held ancient, dark secrets. She had come face to face with the sinister forces lurking beneath the surface of reality. But despite the horrors she encountered, Nancy also discovered the strength within herself to face the unknown and to break free from the chains of fate. From that day forward, she became more cautious in her adventures, but remained open to the mysteries that the world held.